about straight party voting. First myth, it helps one party or the other. Well, actually, 50% of voters in the last 2 presidential elections use straight party voting, and if you've been paying really close attention, as I have, there's a lawsuit going on right now around straight party voting. The state is saying there's no benefit here. We've got, yes, Detroit uses it at a high rate, but so does Ottawa County. Ottawa County is using it and it's Republicans. Detroit is using it and it's Democrats. So the idea that this is somehow a pass for one party or the other, it's not true factually, right? Anybody can use it. You don't even have to choose one of the 2 major parties. But I think there's another much more important way of understanding why straight party voting is critical to maintain. First of all, it's been around for 100 years and people in Michigan are used to it, right? So they have twice fought back against the legislature's effort to eliminate it, okay? So this is not the first time that the legislature has eliminated this. But more importantly, you have to understand straight party voting the way I do. So my job on election day, particularly in presidential years, but in multiple elections, is to sit in the room where the calls come from voters who are having some sort of trouble, right? Sometimes I'm doing that on behalf of a campaign. Sometimes I'm doing that in a nonpartisan way for a civic organization. And so I'm fielding those calls. So what are some things I know about those calls, from those calls? I know that some voters are waiting in long lines on election day. It might not be you, and it might not be you, and it might not be you, and it might be nobody here in Leelanau County. Okay? But there are voters who are waiting in long lines. And it's not, I think sometimes when I get out of Detroit, I know that there's this sense like, well, that's Detroit's problem, because Detroit can't manage its elections. Well, in the 2016 election, there were 3-hour-long lines on the Michigan State campus and the University of Michigan campus. So let's take it out. When I say long lines, I just want you to pause for a second and stop thinking about Detroit and start realizing that there's other places. I'm going to say it was in Novi. There was a precinct in Novi, I remember in 2016. Hours and hours of long lines. Okay, so people wait in long lines. Here's why you saw clerks come out to oppose the elimination of straight party voting. Straight party voting was in operation in 2016, and we had those lines. It is an efficiency. For those who choose to use it, it makes voting in the precinct go faster. They move through their ballot faster. They can spend more time on down ballot issues like ballot initiatives, which we're having more of. In my 20 years of living here in Michigan, we have more today than we did in the beginning. If you eliminate that, and this is what the clerk said, it will be a nightmare. Because this is what folks are used to. This is how they efficiently and effectively process their ballots. If we had the most perfect and pristine voting processing system, I might feel differently. But right now, knowing what I know, taking those calls, listening to those voters waiting in line, removal of straight party voting would be a significant problem. You would start to now see lines in places in which you don't see them. Okay, the next one is automatically register citizens at the Secretary of State unless they decline. This is America, so of course you're going to get to decline if you want to decline. We're not going to force registration. We're not ready for that. A lot of other industrialized nations with higher turnout rates do have, they call it universal registration. I don't think that would fly, at least not yet here in the United States. So what is automatic registration? Automatic registration is essentially the next phase of motor voter. Remember, motor voter is when you go to the Secretary of State, they offer you the opportunity. Well, if you have been waiting at your Secretary of State office for an hour and you have to get back to work, go get your kids, get back to the house to help with a sick family member or whatever, you get on to the next job, and someone says, do you want to do one more thing? The answer, very well, for people who need to get somewhere is no. I have to get out of here. I don't want to, no more, nothing more. I don't want anything more. So what automatic voter registration does is actually, it sort of shifts the burden of saying, okay, if I come in and you're in the Secretary of State line and I know that you meet the qualifications of a voter, I and the Secretary of State, you filled out your forms, I've got my records, and I know you're 18, you're a citizen, you've lived in the community for 30 days, then I'm going to say, here, you're able to register. If you don't want to register, check the box and decline. It shifts the burden. Anybody like ever seen? This is sort of the concept behind the savings plans, like a 401k. That if it's kind of happening automatically, we are more likely to do it because we're human beings and we're looking for the fastest path out the door of the Secretary of State's office. So automatic voter registration is essentially just making the process of what's happening at the Secretary of State a little more automatic, so more people are getting into the pipeline and not saying, you know what, I got to get out of here, leave me alone with that business. And the states that have implemented this have really seen extraordinary results. So Oregon is the first state that implemented it, and it's a much smaller state than us in terms of population, and they had 200,000 new people registered as a. That's a lot. And 43% of those people turned out in the next election, which was the presidential election. So those are significant people that would be participating in the process.
Before we go on to the next one,
Yeah.
maybe I'm dense, but I guess I really don't understand why anybody would oppose a straight party option.
People feel like it's partisan. People, remember how I said before that voting reforms have come to be understood as this battle between the parties? They think straight party voting helps one team or the other. They see the legislature take it away, and the legislature is controlled by Republicans, and so they think that must be because they're removing some sort of advantage. I don't know. I'm sort of your mind that I feel like it's a choice. If you know that that's your choices, then you can use that simple way to mark your choice, and if you don't, then you'll do something different. I wasn't particularly persuaded by the idea that the citizens of Michigan needed some sort of artificial pushing by the legislature to tell them that they needed to vote, one by one. I think people are going to make the choices they're going to make either way. Is there another?
I don't think people understand how straight party voting works either.
Oh, that's true.
It seems like a complication to them, so they think, well, that means I can't vote for anyone else in any other party.
Right.
And it doesn't work that way. It just means that if you didn't check a box, that's the box that gets checked. And if you want to vote for someone else that is in another party, like up here, we don't often have we don't have people running opposed, or we only have a candidate from one party. And so, does that mean if I vote straight party, does that mean that I don't get to vote for my township supervisor? No, I can still cast a vote for another party if I individually mark that box. Most people do not understand that about straight party ticket.
It's called split ticket. You split your ticket. So it's kind of like the default. If you pick the straight party, it's the default for anything that you don't override. But I think it's just become a political football. I think that, as I said, when you see clerks coming forward and saying this is going to be a nightmare, they're not saying that for partisan reasons. They're saying that because they're the people who have to administer the elections. And I think we should be listening to them in that regard. Okay, register anytime. So Michigan has a 30-day voter registration deadline. You have to, if you're a new registrant, you've got to do it by 30 days. And if you have moved, you have to do it by 30 days. If you're moved and you're already registered, you have to update by 30 days. So I'm sure there was a time when this made sense, but we don't live in that world anymore, right? Like this all doesn't happen by paper. We move information around with our statewide voter registration database, and 30 days is just, Michigan is totally out of the norm with this long 30-day voter registration deadline. My example that I always give is Alabama is not known as a super progressive state, and they have a 15-day voter registration deadline. If Alabama can do it, I think Michigan can. But register anytime is what it is. That citizens there should be a mechanism for someone who meets the criteria of eligibility to be a voter, that they are 18, they're a citizen, and they meet the residency, that they should be able to register anytime. that they should not be prohibited from participating in an election because they didn't do something, they did something on the 29th day or the 14th day, that we can have a system in which individuals can register anytime. And if you think that this is new and novel, I encourage you to look at those states who have had registration on election day for 40 years. This is not new, this is not novel. Arguably, it doesn't even require the technology that we now have, right? Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Maine have been registering voters on election day since the mid-70s. There are other states, though. Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, now Illinois. If you look at the map, it's starting to be, a number of the states here around us, between Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, a lot of the sort of upper Midwest. So register anytime starts from this framework of citizens should be able to register. Okay, if you meet those qualifications, we shouldn't be excluding you from the system, from the capacity to vote. So within, though, as you get closer to election day, you should promote the vote would eliminate in the last 14 days being able to register to vote by mail. So during the last 14 days, up to and including election day, you need to come in person. Why? If you've ever worked around elections or you've worked with clerks, at some point they need to know they're not going to keep getting stuff through the mail, right? They need to know if more individuals are registering, they need to come in and have a transaction with the clerk. Also, you would need to provide proof of residency. So one of the things that's, I think, pretty extraordinary about this is when I'm in the rooms getting those calls on election day, this might surprise you, but there are people who are registered to vote who show up in the precinct that they've always been registered in, and they're told that they are not on the voter rolls. Register anytime would be a fail-safe for citizens who either were not, did not meet a 30-day deadline. It would eliminate that barrier. But also for individuals who were registered and show up and are told, you're not registered, I don't see you on my rolls. I don't have a perfect explanation for why that's happening. I see it happen more often. If you go to the Promote the Vote website, we have some stories of voters who had that happen. That's, maybe the tip of the iceberg. I don't know exactly how big the iceberg is, but it's not just those 6 stories, okay? But I don't want to just beat the dead horse of the problems that we have. So register anytime would mean that person would be able to cast a ballot, that they would be able to correct the problem, fill out a registration form again, and be able to cast their ballot. One of the other things that sometimes happens again with those individuals who are registered is, I think this is one of the stories on the website. The gentleman, went to the Secretary of State, let's say on the 29th day, okay? Got his new driver's license for, Traverse City, right? But showed up and they're like, nope, sorry, you did it on the 29th day, you can't vote here. He's got an ID, he went through all the formal forms, he meets the criteria of eligibility, and do you know what they tell you in that instance? Go back to the town you used to live in, you can vote there one more time. If there's ever a system that makes no sense, it's sending somebody back to the city they don't live in anymore. And one of the gentleman from Dexter, the story, I remember he called me because he was just kind of hurt that he was being told he had to weigh in on issues in the city that he no longer lived in. He wanted to weigh in. I think there was a millage issue in his city that he was now a tax-paying citizen in. And it was like, no, sorry, you did it too late. You got to go back to that other town. That just doesn't make any sense in this modern era.
Isn't there a process where you can contest that if you're bold enough that day and you can actually vote where they say you're not registered? Can you discuss that a little bit?
Yeah, so essentially the way some of these things can be solved, not all of what I was describing, through the provisional ballot process. But the thing that's tricky about the provisional ballot process is the provisional ballot process basically, this is the easiest kind of scenario to describe it. Let's say I registered 60 days before the election, but I show up and I've got the driver's license and I see that it went through at the Secretary of State, but I show up and the person says I'm not. Provisional ballot is most effective in that situation because a person can say, on, November, October, September 5th I went in and I updated my registration. Because one of the questions is, I registered, on such and such a date in such and such a place. If you registered 15 years ago, what are you going to remember about that, right? And so sometimes it becomes this difficulty for people who are really caught off guard of, I don't remember when or where I registered back in the day. So the provisional ballot is intended to address some of those problems, but it doesn't address all of them. For example, if you didn't meet the 30-day deadline, you don't get a provisional ballot. The other thing I will say is there is, I think, a relationship between the provisional ballot sort of concept and register anytime. Has anybody here ever worked as an election inspector? Okay, so you have. Did you have to do a provisional ballot? Is it fun? No. It's very difficult. It's confusing. The state has tried to redo the form and make it more simple. But part of the reason why it's confusing is because there's this inherent question that I think is uncomfortable for the poll worker of am I supposed to give you a ballot or not? And am I supposed to count the ballot or not? And those are some of the questions that are determined through the process. But that makes, I think, election workers very uncomfortable, right? Whereas if you had a process that said, hey, you're showing me an ID, you live here, I can see you're 18 and I know you're a citizen, fill out a voter registration form and let's get on with this, it would be a more, it would have less decision points, I think, and it would be a more of an affirmative process to register the person, here are the steps of what they have to do, and then give them the ballot. The provisional ballot process is something both clerks don't like, frankly, attorneys who watch elections don't like it. It's just complicated. Okay, I think we have two more. No excuse absentee voting. Boy, how long have we been waiting for no excuse absentee voting? How many of our last, several Republican secretaries of state have endorsed no reason absentee voting? How many other states, I said earlier, provide this? It's just, I don't know. What more can I say? We've been waiting for it forever, and we should have it. And the last is the post-election audit. So again, this is a missing piece of Michigan's election process right now. We need to make sure that we are verifying. One of the things about the post-election audit is, promote the vote. It does not prescribe to a particular type of audit. And I say that because if you're sort of a geek around audits like I am, there's something called a risk limiting audit. That's sort of the current version that people feel like is the best. Well, but this is our Constitution. We don't necessarily want to limit ourselves to the form of audit that is the best today in 2018. We should have an audit process. We should be checking our elections. That should be something that we should expect and we should trust that our government is doing, but we should have the flexibility to implement what is the best mechanism for doing that.
Sharon,
Yeah.
question?
Yes.
On the no absentee voting, I know when I participated in voter registration for college students, and we say you have to show up with your application to the clerk's office in order to vote. Would that be covered if you are automatically registered at the Secretary of State's office? And does that need
Okay,
to
so
be
this is
in
a
there?
big web. This is a big web of questions. Don't let me forget that question, but I want to back up for a second and sort of talk about the young person away at college. I think we, for a long time, have criticized young people for their participation in elections. And I think we might want to reconsider that, right? I'm not saying any of you did that, right? But sort of the common wisdom is young people don't care, or they're not invested, or whatever the excuses are. Let's talk about what happens for a young person who wants to vote when they're away at school. The first question is, where do I register? Students can choose to register at their campus address or a home address. So the first problem that they're confronted with, that I am not confronted with when I go to register, is what address do I use, right? And you have to really remember, you did live in that world then of your parents' address or your home base address, and then your campus address really didn't mean much to you, right? You got very little mail there. If you had official documentation, you didn't send it there, it got sent back home. And that made sense because you're going to change that address every year. So why would we want to be using that as our official address on, for example, your driver's license? So if a young person chooses to register at campus, that changes their driver's license, which, in my humble opinion, they're more concerned about than probably they need to be, and I'll explain why. But it's just not very helpful to have a driver's license that has to change an address every year, right? Like, it's kind of by definition not a very good official document if your address is so fluid. So that's the first problem they have, right? So if they choose the campus address, they have now this driver's license problem, and now it's going to have to get changed again. The reason why I said I don't think it's as significant a problem as sometimes students think it is because you can update your address on the Secretary of State's website if you have a driver's license, and that will automatically update your voter registration. So what does that mean? If you are at Northwestern Michigan College and you are registering voters, I encourage students to register where they live right now. Why? Because are you really going to deal with all the rigmarole of how to get a ballot or where to get a ballot? You want to go to the place as close as you can, right down the street or right down the block or right in the neighborhood. Everybody wants to do that. That's what I do. I go to my neighborhood school. So I encourage students to register on campus. And then I say, after the election, simply go onto the website and switch your license back. And all of it happens now by just stickers. The Secretary of State sends stickers. You don't necessarily have to go into the office. So that is my recommendation if you are registering students. I take that responsibility to suggest what I think is the most effective and efficient path for them. Some students will say, no, I need to stay at home, and then you'll have to have a different set of conversations with them. But I really take the opportunity to say to folks, I think students are better served if they register at their campuses. They can switch it later. Okay, so now that was just step one. So now if they register at home, as you highlighted, if they register at home, I should back up. You know, students are normally registering in a paper form. They are less likely to register at the Secretary of State because you don't have to get a license at 18 years in one day. You don't have to go back to the Secretary of State and have a transaction at 18 and a half or 19, right? It's my understanding that it's 20 that you have to go back to get your new license if you got one at 16. So if you're just waiting to have a transaction at the Secretary of State, you're going to wait 2 years after you became eligible to be before a government official who's going to offer you the opportunity to vote. So if you do register by mail, which most of them do with friends like the League of Women Voters, or parties are on campuses, registering. So you're doing a paper form, you're registering back at mom and dad's house, and then you discover, normally on election day, despite our warnings, that you can't vote right up the street from Northwestern Michigan College. You have to vote in Grand Rapids where mom and dad live. And by that point, it's too late to do anything about it. Register anytime is the solution to that. Because you'd be able to register. You would have lived at the campus for more than 30 days. You're 18 and you're a citizen. So you could register on campus that day and be able to cast your ballot.
Okay, the question
Yeah.
that I'm aware of though is that first vote for the clerk, your clerk,
Yep.
or Secretary of State would have to see you in person at least once before you can vote.
Right, but what I'm saying is this is how it plays out in my experience. The student wants to go vote on election day and they call the hotline and they go, I need to get to Grand Rapids and I can't get to Grand Rapids, and I say, I can't help you. There's nothing I can do. I can't get you to Grand Rapids, and you didn't update your registration for Ann Arbor, let's say, or Traverse City. There's nothing we can do. Your only choice is to go to Grand Rapids. If you have register anytime, that student can re-register that day at Northwestern Michigan College and cast a ballot. They'll do it in person. They would have to re-register in person. So if a student is unwilling to register anywhere other than their home address, that's not going to solve that problem. But I find students are looking for the solution on election day. They want to know how they can cast their ballot, and register anytime would allow them to make sure their voices are heard. Did that answer? It did? Okay.
The other solution would be for them to update their registration and request an absentee ballot, or go to see their person in their clerk.
Yes, if they go in, you cannot get an absentee ballot the first time if you register by mail. That is did I say that right? If you register by mail, I normally say it in a different way. If you're a mail-in registrant, it's your first time being registered in Michigan, you cannot get an absentee ballot mailed to you. You have to show up and present your physical body to some government official at some point in the process. So, yes, you could go into your clerk. You could always register in person. You could register by mail and then go into your clerk when you're home for Thanksgiving is afterwards. You're home for some reason, you could go into your clerk. You can go into your Secretary of State office. But I don't know about you, all the things that we just described, students are not listening to me anymore by the time I get to all those explanations. They're just not. And many members of the public wouldn't listen to me through all of that. It's not because students, right. So students have this very, I'm supposed to be on a phone call. No, I canceled it. So students, we have this horrible predicament that we put them in, all of these challenges. And then we wonder why they're not participating. And let's just say one more thing, the icing on the cake is for those students who did register on campus in 2016, they waited in 3-hour-long lines. So should we look at ourselves and the system we designed and say maybe we're responsible for the participation of young people? If you're over 60, by law, you can get an absentee ballot. Strikes me that might benefit one age group. 18-year-olds don't have that benefit. There's no special carve-out for them. Okay. So thoughts and ideas need action. Promote the vote, as I described it to you, is a set of concepts. It's a set of words, right, that would go into the Constitution. But we didn't have the voting rights movement of the last century, and we are not going to have this voting rights movement with just thoughts and ideas. We need action. So this is where we shift to action. There are 3 actions or 3 sets of actions, and I'm going to go over number 1 and number 2, and then either Christy or Joan are going to talk about, would you talk about the items? Okay. So the first thing that you can do is get connected. So if you haven't already done so, you can go to the Promote the Vote website. Let's see. All right. I'm not connected to the Wi-Fi here. If you go to the Promote the Vote website, which is listed there, promotetheVoteMI.com, right on the main page you can put in your information and you can start to get updates on Promote the Vote. What would those updates be? They would be updates about signature gathering events happening in your community that you could, maybe you're willing to help, but you don't want to organize, you just want to be able to show up and participate. That's happening already. Signing up will allow you to get notices of that. Signing up will also allow you to know that there are every other week on Tuesday evenings, there's signature gathering, trainings happening online, webinars. So if you're like, I'm ready to do it in my town, I don't need to coordinate with other people. I'm ready to go out to whatever, the farmer's market or what have you, but I just want to make sure I know what I need to know to do it well and the best way and collect the best signatures. Sign up at promotethevote.com and we're gonna have webinars for that. Also this past Monday evening, what day is it, Wednesday? Monday evening we did our first organizing call, which is just like you want to update on what's going on with the campaign and what's coming up. So that we're also building out a speakers bureau. I'm in charge of that because I need to multiply myself by about 50. And passionate individuals like yourself that are interested in it, if you're feeling like that would be something you're interested in, we'll train you to do that. The second thing is sign the petition. Don't leave today without signing the petition if you're supportive of Promote the Vote. And the third thing is to get engaged in collecting signatures. So I'll ask Joan to come up and highlight some of that.
Thank you, Sharon. We talked a little bit yesterday about things we can do, direct action we can do immediately here, and that's what's on the end of the slide. The first thing we wanted to point out was that next week on the 10th of April from 11:30 to 1:30 in the afternoon down at NMC in the lobby of the Health Sciences Building, it's a Pay Equity Day, Awareness Day, Women's Pay Equity Awareness Day. So we're going to be down at NMC again, a group of us, and anyone who wants to volunteer is welcome to come. Grand Traverse Pie Company is providing pie to attract students to the lobby, which is attracting some of us who are not students as well. And we're going to circulate the petitions and register voters and talk a little bit about the fact that the average woman works until April 10th for free, before she, because of the inequity in our pay with men. Then, Christy had this great idea too, and she has this experience from Voters Not Politicians petition work last fall. The farmers markets are about to open, get up and get going again, and it's a great place to collect petition signatures. So she had the idea of maybe we would want to adopt a farmers market near